Alright, Visio update. Anyway, I resolved my pulley alignment issues. Um, well, the water pump that came with the engine is this guy here. This is a Corvette specific water pump, and the pulleys for these pumps don't seem to play well with any other small block Chevy setup. So the issues I was having was I had this pulley on that other water pump, and it would not line up with the crank pulley. So what I ended up doing, I went with an aftermarket, what they call a short water pump, meaning the nose is a little bit shorter than the long water pump. This pulley was made specifically for the short water pumps, and it lines up with that crank pulley. And then I also have plans for see, I've got the brackets for the alternator. One odd, interesting thing was this exhaust manifold came off a 64 Chevelle, and it was supposed to already have the bolt locations for an alternator bracket, this little guy actually. But oddly enough, the holes don't line up with at least this bracket. I could search around and find this bracket that is specific to this manifold, but I've already got this. Turns out this little chrome bracket here actually bolts to the manifold bolts, and then this I believe gets bolted like so, and then that gives you those little brackets there for the bottom side of the alternator. And I'm hoping I still have enough room to play with up against this fresh air intake into the cab, but we'll cross that bridge when we get there. On the other side is going to be brackets for air conditioning, because that is highly desired down here in Florida. Right now I've got to get new radiator hoses. This was actually the radiator that came with the car when I bought it, and I was having some fitment issues. It would be bolted in on one side, but it wouldn't quite reach the radiator support on the other side, and I had to consult some other 54 Chevy owners, and they gave me a measurement from bolt to bolt, and they were saying it's about 24 inches, and mine was measuring like 27. So I thought that this was the wrong radiator. Turns out there's supposed to be a radiator support, goes from here straight across to the other side, and someone's taken that support out. I'm assuming when they pulled the straight six, because the straight six that came in this car was not actually the original engine. It was a different engine. I think it actually came out of a truck, but I'm assuming they pulled that radiator support to pull the engine out, and they never put that support back in. So these fenders actually, they would sag, and it would stretch that radiator support. So long story short, I put a ratchet strap across the two, pulled the two fenders back together, and was able to bolt the radiator back in. But I would still like to fabricate a support that goes across, just so the radiator is not the only thing holding that weight. Also, an interesting little development. So I got the carburetor in. I got the fuel rail with the neat little gauge put in. An issue I run into is, let's say if I want, if I'm running the heat, there's going to be a a hose nipple coming off of the water pump like so. And whenever I get around to installing that, I'll just temporarily put it in here so I don't forget or lose this piece. And then this guy here, so this, let's see, I'm trying to remember if this, I think this is a return, goes back into the radiator. This, I think, actually goes, supposed to go into that hole there, but I'm up against the fuel rail. So I had a couple of ideas. Maybe I could put a bend in this fuel rail that will bring this up so it'll clear this hose. But I think I might be able to get away with putting a carburetor spacer in here, like maybe a 1 inch. I think they go up to like an 1.5 inch or 2 inch spacer. It'll pick up the whole carburetor, and it'll, you know, obviously in turn pull this fuel rail away to put that in. But I'm looking at other alternatives. Eventually I got to pull this plug back out because I think I'm going to have to run a temperature sensor there, and got to change out the temperature, the water temp sensor gauge, because it's all capillary. The original system, I think I'll show you here. Where'd that little booger go? Is it here? No, it's not here. It's laying here. So this actually bolts down into the head, or yeah, it's usually in the head. And it's a capillary system, so when it gets hot, there's actually, this tube is pressurized, and of course the hotter it gets, the more pressure builds up in that tube, and it would indicate on your temperature gauge. An issue I'm having is I don't have a place to bolt this in. You know, I don't have a place on the head anywhere, or on the intake manifold, and that capillary tube doesn't quite reach a place that I could put, you know, that little probe. And there's another place down here and on the head, again, it just doesn't quite reach. So that's something I'm gonna have to figure out. Like I said, I might just run a different, like an aftermarket water temp gauge, and just be done with it. What else is going on? Like I said, I'm working on new radiator hoses. Finishing buttoning up everything on the bottom of the car. Cross members all bolted in, except that bracket going to the transmission. I'm leaving that loose for right now. When I get the shifter kit, I'm gonna have to drop the transmission, just unbolt it and let it kind of come down a little bit, and then I can get the shifter up in there. Gotta cut a hole in the floor for the shifter to come through. Let's see what else. I had to get a new starter and a new flex plate installed, and then once that was installed, I put the little chrome cover on the transmission, kind of clean up everything. Everything's all nice and high and tight. Rear axle's in. The only thing left back there is I gotta rebuild the brakes. I'll stay with drum brakes for now until I can get you know, disc brake conversion going on. Same with the fronts. I'll do disc brakes down the road, because that requires having to swap out master cylinders and all that jazz. Anyway, just a little bit of this and that. I got this installed today. Well, sort of installed. I got to tighten it up, but it's the trunk handle, and there's supposed to be an emblem in here. Everything's just temp installed. I'll have to pull that back off when I go to sand that down and do some body work. Well, anyway, that's where the car is now. I should be able to, you know, theoretically I could wire the starter back up, and it should fire right up. But I want to do the battery relocation to the trunk, and I'll have to rewire the starter anyways, so I'll just wait. But yeah, that's it.